So welcome, Raphan. Thank you so much for being here for the Love of Group Fitness
Well,
podcast.
no, nice to see you, and thank you for having me again.
Yeah, no,
hmm
it's great because it's been a while, right? 6
hmm
months, 7 months, more maybe that
Perhaps eight
we
or nine, yes.
yeah, definitely. So group fitness is kind of where I started in the industry, if you like,
hmm
even though my background is martial arts and my background is yoga. I started, I guess, teaching in group fitness more
hmm
than yoga and martial arts. So how did you end up doing what you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of the important stuff that led me to. I think what I like to share with people when we talk about teaching and fitness, but teaching in particular, to start with teaching, is that I always talked. I might have mentioned this to you before, but my mom was a child minder. And so I had students, um, there for me to teach pretty much every day from the age of 4 or 5. And
Mm,
as I kept growing, the students stayed pretty much the same age. So by the time I got to the age of 8, 9, 10, 12, you name it, there was always someone there for me to somehow share whatever I was going through, whatever I was learning, whatever I was interested in. And so this sharing of knowledge, of sharing of passion, of sharing of interest
mm,
has always been part of my life. That's how I think I became a teacher. Um, Now, in relation to getting into fitness and yoga in
movement.
particular and
Mm,
movement, through injuries and the need for myself to get into the class setting as a student, to get into back into shape somehow. I had massive back and neck issues, and so I found myself going to Pilates classes and yoga
okay.
classes close to 20 years ago, and fairly quickly started teaching. Um, Back in those days, there were not a lot of classes. Well, I should
Mm,
say, sorry, not a lot of teachers. So I was lucky enough to, within a few months of teaching, I became a full-time teacher, and
mhm,
that was 17 years ago. So that's me,
mm.
just my story in terms of since the age of 6 to to now, in a nutshell. So that's how I started my professional teaching gig, so to speak.
So
Yeah.
what were you doing before?
I was a musician. I was a bass player.
Oh, do you still play?
I don't. I don't. No.
No.
Well, it's the bass that gave me all the back problems. And
Yeah.
then when I started teaching and the classes kept calling, and pay was much more regular than my playing,
Hmm.
meaning that teaching yoga was basically my corporate job. I eventually had to make a decision as to whether I would still try to do both. And it became difficult because having a gig on a Friday night or on a Thursday night or on a Tuesday night or going away on a weekend for a small tour or even going on a 1 or 2 week tour proved difficult if you wanted to build consistency in your classes. And I'm sure
Mm.
we're going to talk about that. But within the fitness slash group collective
Yeah.
teaching aspect, one massive aspect of becoming better and having a thriving practice or a successful class of sort is consistency. And I've realized
Mm.
that from the get go. And whilst yes, you could get other people to cover for you, it was better for me to be there as much as I possibly can. Also, because as a musician, from time to time, you know, back in them days, playing trip hop, drum and bass, reggae music, you would go and have and play somewhere, and money that you were supposed to get ended up being a third or half of what you were supposed to. And
Yeah.
so you came back, and that there was always this uncertainty about actually going somewhere and coming back with enough money to pay your bills. And teaching yoga allowed me to pay my bills and to feed my kids. So there was
Mm.
some things much more certain there and something I could rely on a lot more. So I decided to go for that. So little by little, I simply stopped playing, and I don't really miss the playing. I miss the camaraderie. I miss the going to the studio. I miss the creation aspect. But otherwise, no, I'm good. Yeah, happily
I
retired.
guess I guess you still get the sense of music with what you do, right?
I
Anyway.
do because I use music in my classes a
Mm,
lot. Yeah.
mm, mm. Yeah, no, we have I live in a small village in England, and in the next village along there is a brother and sister that opened a deli, and they
Mhm.
opened during COVID.
Oh wow.
And he's a session player for he plays the saxophone.
You see.
And it's hard because he's got young kids, and then they've now got this deli, and now that things have opened up, he's like away in America, and then he's back, and then he's
Mhm.
away again. It's just, the lifestyle is just a little bit crazy, I think, regardless of the money. When you've got children, young kids, and I think his wife is expecting now as well, another one.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Not
you
an easy life.
so you use music, obviously. Is that the driver behind, because tell people a little bit more about your approach to movement.
Sure. I teach a method called Space and Flow, which I started to
Mm-hmm.
create 12 years ago now. So it's a young school. But to make a long story short, I started teaching yoga 17 years ago, as I mentioned. And there was always something that I wanted to share and something that I also wanted to experience as a student going to a yoga class. And it was something more sensual,
Mm,
something more musical, something more dancey. So to follow the advice that you should write the book that you want to read, I started developing something along the lines of sensual, musical, artistic movement, uh, sun salutation based, movement based yoga practice. And that's what I've been doing, building and refining for the past 12 years. The practice in the school is called Space and Flow Yoga.
mm.
I train teachers in different countries and now in different languages. And music is part of the offer. It's part of the practice and the event. I don't play live music. I play tracks that I compile on Spotify and that I've been putting together for a long time. But what I mean by musicality is bringing about a sense of timing and appreciation for sounds and silences, because movement is poses in space and it's action in space. It's all about time, and
Mm.
music gives us something we can rely on, and that we can move on, and we can be not only boosted by, but we can be inspired by as well. So music is an important tool, both of the practice, but also of the teaching. It allows me not to speak so much, because by the time a movement has been set up properly, we can get on with it. And music
Mm.
is right there just to sustain us in giving us a sense of time, a tempo, a meter to work with, and oftentimes that's all we need.
It's beautiful. The bits that I watch that you share on social media is absolutely mesmerizing to watch
No, thank you.
your stuff, honestly. So, for the creative process for our listeners, so the
Yeah.
creative process on your part, does the movement come first or the music come first? Or is it a marriage of both?
Oh, I've never asked myself that question actually. I'd like to, I like to think of us as music, walking music machines. And for that reason, because as I've just mentioned, I think that movement is time and movement is music. I would say if I had to choose, music is first.
Mm,
Having said that, I am very, very capable of creating movement patterns and movement sequences without any music on.
mm.
But the idea is that I convey some form of musicality through my body. So interestingly enough, about the compliment you were just paying me, most of those sequences were done without music. And what I
Mm,
mean by that is that this is me just trying to convey a musical sense through um, my movements
mm,
without necessarily dancing to a particular song.
mm.
Does that
And
make
that
sense?
comes across, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, and that completely makes sense. It's so apparent now you're saying that.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody, you know, jump on social media and just have a look at some of the work that you've shared, and it is definitely it's musical without the music. It's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating to watch,
No,
really.
thanks. Yeah, that's
Mm,
one of. After that, it's my goal and my prerogative, my goal as a practitioner and as a teacher, and also what keeps me involved and what keeps me excited. It's not necessarily going to be the same case for other space and flow teachers, but at least from my point of view, it's what I try to convey when I move,
mm,
which is music.
mm. So you obviously made this leap where you needed to do something for your own body,
Mm-hmm.
and then you got into yoga, etc., and then you decided to create this space and flow.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another leap with now, you've been training teachers for a while.
Mm-hmm.
How how did you negotiate those leaps? What made you make the leap?
Well, that's easy. I didn't have a choice. And it's always it's always easier when you don't have a choice and you're somehow your hand is forced, so to speak. Um, Pardon me. The I think you're asking me in terms of how to negotiate, especially back when movement practices within the yoga world was not really a thing, um, which was to come up, invent, and somehow organize the practice in a way that is different from the convention. Many people will call it traditional way. I call it convention because it was just conventional, and also because the practice, Ashtanga-based practice, is just not old enough to be a tradition just yet, or at least it wasn't in my case
Mm,
15 years ago. Um, so the way I've negotiated that is through a couple of qualities I can share with you. One is naivete. The second one is stubbornness. And the third one is possibly the ability or the capacity to dream that I have about things and somehow walk towards them with without too much worry that it will eventually make sense or not, because I know it will. So I could say perhaps faith in myself or faith in the creativity aspect of my practice and teaching. So I think this is how I negotiated it. And I've talked to some of my teachers about that, um, as they're now wanting to teach space and flow in yoga centers, studios, and having to negotiate the fact that it's a movement-based practice and not a
mm,
not a posture-based practice. And there's a massive difference between one
mm,
and the other.
mhm,
And they found themselves having to negotiate not only just with the studio managers, but also with their own students and obviously sometimes even themselves, because you tend to rely on your conditioning. And whilst one may love movement and feel themselves to be a dancer, as soon as you start rolling out a mat, a yoga mat, conditioning kicks in and you find yourself making shapes
yeah.
and then linking them and then saying, I'm flowing because I'm breathing in and breathing out. And space and flow challenges that, meaning that I pay attention to transition, very, very little attention to postures, transitions. And with that, my relationship to the ground, my relationship to my spine, and how free my breath is. So, with that in mind, transition take over. And if and when I decide to pause in space somewhere, then I can call this a pose, an asana, a posture of sort that I hold. But it is transition based. And that's a different vocabulary, that's a
Mm,
different language, it's a slightly different mindset also. So one has got to be quite comfortable um, being misunderstood, and which is something I think I've always had. In order to put that and to share that in the context where people just want sometimes a stretch, or want something they can recognize. They want something they can guess what's going to come next as they're doing it. And I specialize in the opposite of that.
Mm.
So yeah, that's
So,
how it's been. Yeah, that's how I had to deal with it.
so how do you? I know that you mentor teachers as well.
That I
So
what? Sorry.
you mentor teachers. You kind
Yeah,
of help
I
them
do.
along the way. So for the teachers that need to negotiate this transition, not the transition from movement to movement, but the transitions in life,
Mm-hmm.
in wanting to take space and flow it into, like, I don't know, a big club chain or whatever it is,
Yeah.
um, what advice do you give them? Because
To
not
you,
everyone's ready to, or brave enough to, or stubborn enough,
true that. I give them, I tell them a few stories, and I'll share one in order to answer this question, and then I'll give you some more. I remember teaching. I did a lot of gyms back in my day. Like I'm talking Virgin Actives,
Mm,
Lloyd's, Cannons, Health Club, and a few other smaller gyms. But I always loved it personally. One, there was something that I always remember yoga practitioners and certain yogis, and even some of my colleagues not liking it, because people came sweaty from the gym floor. Um, they didn't know how to behave. There was not the same reverence, towards yoga teachers, because they just thought they were other group fitness professionals teaching another. And I personally always loved that. I liked the simplicity of it, and I loved people not really taking it that seriously. That helps a lot to me. So perhaps as one little advice that I would give is that don't take the practice too seriously. No matter how much it means to you, no matter how spiritual you think it is, no matter how good you think it is, and no matter how powerful you think the practice can be for whoever's got issues with their back and their ankles and so on and so forth, don't take yourself too seriously with it, especially within the context of a gym. And so I remember realizing a few things that really have served me a lot during my teaching, during my years teaching in the context of gyms. For instance, someone coming in, you giving them a mat, them rolling it out just like everybody else would do around, and literally stepping and standing on their yoga mats with their shoes on. Not as a sign of disrespect, as I've
mm.
heard teachers say, but simply as the symbolism of not knowing,
Yeah,
excuse my language, what the fuck to do
yeah.
on this mat. Not even understanding or knowing the relevance of taking the shoes and the socks off.
Mm,
So my advice to the teachers that I train now is to take that with a smile, and to fully understand, or to actually appreciate and acknowledge that our first job, sorry, as teachers, is to teach people how to learn.
mm,
We haven't even talked about the actual discipline that you're sharing with others.
mm,
People are here not just for the stretch. First and foremost, we have another job, which is to tell them how to receive instructions from us, whatever it is that we teach. And it
mm,
may come first and foremost in the form of, sorry, Sally. Hey, John, take your shoes off, take your socks off. You're going to be a lot more comfortable on this mat. Trust me.
mm,
First things first. And just that simple instructions now creates a difference between the gym floor and now what they used to call it holistic studios,
mhm,
and which is a nice little switch, not differentiation in order to make one better than the other, but just to say, John, when you come in here, feel free to take your shoes off, your socks off. If you've had a sweaty things, yes, perhaps go into the changing room, have a little wash of your feet, and come and join us. That is part of the teaching, and I've had to learn how to value those moments,
mm,
because in those moments, one to one, I was allowed to express and to get to know someone one to one before giving a whole group fitness experience.
Mm.
And I could also get the skills required to say this needs to be done first and foremost in order for the class to function, in order for the practice to really reach you in the way that I wanted to reach you. Certain things need to be set up.
Mm.
So that has happened to me quite a few times. And what you know, the whole thing of coming off the gym floor and jumping from one class to the other is is something I love. And more importantly, the advice, another advice I would give teacher is to teach as much as they possibly can. And if you can teach in a gym, and obviously we can talk about the money side and all those things after, but if you can teach in a gym and do 5, 6, 7, 8 classes a week, that's practice time for you as a teacher.
Mm.
You know, and that's valuable, especially nowadays when everyone is a teacher, where so many people want to teach, where many teachers don't teach enough to make a living. Many people don't teach a living, so many people don't teach enough to make a living, but not many people teach enough to become good at teaching, because that takes practice. So
Mm.
appreciate it for what it is. Yes, the 15, 20, 25 quid you might receive for the class is not well paid, but it gives you, you know, skin in the game, so to speak. It gives you something to work. It gives you something to put your teeth in. So
Mm.
my advice is take it with a, you know, with gratitude, not to be exploited. I'm not telling you to work for free, but I would send that if you are the beginning of your career and you really need to put the miles in, you know, because the ability to cue a sun salutation is one thing, the ability to teach is another, and the
Yes.
teaching aspect is is what's important and what you're going to be able to build, having done, you know, the queuing thousands of time.
Mm.
So the, you know, the social interactions, the correlational, I'm sorry, the relational aspect of the teaching aspect, is something that, if you get a chance to do, then I would say jump at it.
Mm.
Um, how to transition, because I think your question was in relation to yoga moving into areas that perhaps the practice of movement or space and flow or anything that is
Mm.
transition based is not the most welcome. You're going to have to do what other people in other industries do first and foremost. You're going to have to match before you differentiate, meaning you are going to have to use as much as possible of the vocabulary, both physical and verbal, that people are used to in this environment,
Mm.
to sell yourself first, not the practice. You're going to have to sell yourself first. That would be my
Mm.
advice. That's what I've done and what I feel has worked for me. Um, it's only a few examples, but I can tell you that I've covered a few classes, and most classes and most gyms that I've covered at eventually reached out and said, you know, we usually hear complaints, so especially at Virgin Actives. Um, and for the first time, someone or a few people came in and we thought, okay, here we go. What's wrong now? And for the first time, they all came in saying, we like this guy with the French accent who came to teach us.
Mm.
You probably should get him, you know, more often.
Mm.
So many of my classes were through literally direct feedback from people going, you know, we want
We
him.
want him. We want him.
And the way I went about it was exactly that. It was a case of, you know what, people to people. I mentioned this in our last conversation. People to people. The practice comes second.
Mm.
It doesn't matter how spiritually advanced you think the thing is. It doesn't matter the lineage. It doesn't matter how many backs have been saved. It doesn't matter how many, all of that. Put that
Mm.
aside for a minute and appreciate that when someone comes with their doubts and their uncertainties, and they're stepping into a room and they haven't taken any classes, they want to be taught,
Mm.
not patronized, not saved, not psychoanalyzed. They just want to be taught how to learn so that they can then make their own choices. So you shake people's hands, you converse with them, you listen to them, you have a, you know, the whole NLP thing, try to listen to the keywords they use. What type of listeners are they? Um, make sure that you gather your own strength in order to, to get your own boundaries sorted out also. And then match, meaning that if someone says to you, I normally always do the Ashtanga class on a Monday, but I can't do it because of work or my kids and so on and so forth, throw in a bit of the primary or secondary series in there, so that some of it, not all of it, perhaps half of it, perhaps 2/3 of it, of the class that you teach is basically recognizable.
Mm,
And then once you have their trust, start introducing other things that has been working for you.
mm. It's building that trust first, I think, isn't it? And building rapport, and by
Building
building
rapport.
rapport, we end up building the trust. Now,
Mhm.
is this something that you've just naturally been good at, or is this something that you've learnt the hard way from teaching over the years?
I think a bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely, um, I come from Paris originally, and I moved to London in 97, 25 years ago now. And I started teaching in 2005, 7 years later. My English was not really good. My accent was a lot thicker than it is now. And I think that I subconsciously understood that I was going to have to use other things in order to sell what I had to sell. So, charm,
Mm,
jokes, good and bad jokes, music, musicality, sensuality. Back in those days, touch was much more part of the education that we shared. Um, and then the more I did it, and especially to come back to your previous question about starting um, to create and to develop space and flow, now teaching a movement practice within yoga settings,
mm,
I realized that some people didn't necessarily want nor like the movement practice, but they came for me.
mm,
And that is something that was told to me directly in the class from time to time with jokes, but also quite some truth in it. They're going like, I have no idea what we're doing here, Raphan. I don't care. And to be honest with you, I'm not remembering it tomorrow. And part of me doesn't like it. But I like the music you play. I like the bad jokes you make. And I like how I feel at the end of the class. That's it.
mm,
And so I built on that. And it was a case of I talked at a studio in Indaba called Indaba in London. I was there for 10 years. Pardon me, Space and Flow, the very first Space and Flow class was on the very first day of the school, of the studio opening, June 17th, I think, of 11, 12 years ago. No, I'm sorry. 12 years ago. Um, and the Friday opener on the Friday in my class was 6 o'clock Friday night, 6:30, which I kept for, up until COVID. And what I did, practically speaking, was I would do my best to show up early, not always successful in London with public transport and all of that, but I would be there 5, 10 minutes. People will get settled. I would put some music on, the vibe that I wanted to cultivate even
mm,
before we did anything, you know, and I would go around the room, shake people's hand, give people hugs, talk to them, ask them how they were, do the whole people to people thing.
mm,
And so that once I changed the music and I said, okay, guys, let's go, come on all fours or come to the top of your mat or come into a downward facing dog, whatever, I somehow had already tuned not only into myself, but I tuned into them and they tuned into me and they tuned into each other because I created an environment that was um, that was needed for what I wanted to create, which
mm,
was an environment where we're going to be experimenting, where we don't have all the answers, where we're going to allow ourselves to swear, we're going to allow ourselves to move our asses to the right and our asses to the left. We're going to allow us, our spine to move, and we are going to allow ourselves to move, not as if we've got something stuck up our bum, but as if we've got things to say with, our movements. And so I've realized that people to people was something. Now, I'm not saying that I was good at it. I'm saying I kept refining it. I later on, the reverse of that is that I met someone on a train one day, and she said to me, I really liked your classes, but I used to come out of that sometimes very, very confused because my body really loved the practice, but my mind really disliked you. And that was very
It's
interesting.
interesting.
And I loved, also the whole culture thing. One is, I'm from Paris, and she was from London, if I remember properly, or basically an English lady, with a certain way of being about it. And I'm me on the other side. I'm there, and I touch without asking, and I make silly jokes, and I talk about boobs, and I talk about bombs, and I make references to spanking, and I make, basic the stuff that works
Yeah.
physically. And, between you and I, as sometimes lifting your sternum and do this with your heart. Great. Tell you what, lift your boobs up.
Yeah.
Oh, that works.
Yeah.
And so whilst she, she was confused, as in her brain just didn't like the way I talked and what I basically permitted myself to say within that context, she would come out of the class somehow feeling spaced out in a way that she felt creative, she felt artistic, she felt like an artist, and she felt, I remember saying, I feel sensual. And which was the end. And then she had to leave. We were on a train. I remember saying, I feel sensual. Sometimes I love it, and sometimes I don't. And then she had to leave, so we couldn't carry on that conversation. And I've never met her, never seen her again. So if you're listening to this conversation, get in touch. I'd love for us to talk some more about that. But that was, that was close to 7-8 years ago. Because, and in that conversation also, I've learned a lot, which is a case of, okay, you are teaching and cultivating certain things, but it also means that somehow you are forcing people to reinvent their stories, because you are now putting them somewhere where they are going to discover aspects, or perhaps rediscover aspects of themselves that they've put on the side, either for good or bad reasons. And with that is going to come reactions, is going to come likes and dislikes, preferences, and so on and so forth. And you, as a teacher and as a guide and as a leader, have got to build the resilience to have all those things coming back at you.
Yeah.
So to carry on with the thread of advice and suggestions I would give, people going in teaching movement or things that are different within certain context. There's one thing that in all of the yoga teacher training courses I've been taught, which at the time I thought was a bit daft, but I agree with it wholeheartedly because I've actually used it. And it is to not get attached to either good compliments or negative reactions exactly the same way. So it doesn't matter. I remember I did a Jivamukti training in 2007. That was my second one. And both of my first teacher training courses in Canada and Jivamukti was very heavy on that, which was, I remember Shannon saying, it doesn't matter how many airplanes you get. It doesn't matter how many festivals you teach at. It doesn't matter how many people show up to your classes. It doesn't matter how many classes you have per week. Take the praises and the criticism exactly the same way, without much attachment. And that stayed with me. And when I mentioned naivete early on, I think I was relating it to that, which was that I somehow played a lot more naive than I was. I somehow, did not really get attached to the whole I love it. This should really stay as it is, because obviously that meant that I was never going to grow the practice any further. And I knew there were more to be created, more to be asked, more to be answered. Nor the I'm walking out of this because this is not a yoga class type of
Mm,
feedback. You know what I mean? It's like, no, I am going to
mm,
carry on. I appreciate whatever is going on with you right now. I can understand that you came to your usual Ashtanga class, and this guy is covering the class and is now telling you to turn around to face the other side of the room of the, and that's a challenge for you. But I'm not going to change. I'm going to try my best to adapt so that next time I come, I teach you a little more of what you're used to, but I am not going to take this compliment, whether good or bad, um, and build on that, because that's just not the way.
mm,
Um, that was easier because back then there was no Instagram, there was no
yeah.
Facebook, and the feedback that you had was pretty much people either show up again or they don't,
Mm,
and or their voice literally say something on the spot or after the class, or you hear it by the studio coordinator or studio manager coming to
mm,
you and just kind of telling you this and that. um, Nowadays, I can that's what I'm mentoring teachers who sometimes are posting beautiful looking sequences of movement, find themselves with a few DMs and quite a few messages of this is amazing, this is amazing, this is
mm,
amazing. But on the back of that, they know that actually they don't have a clue as to what they've created and why it works and what doesn't about it. And they find themselves kind of victims of their own visual success, where they basically go on the compliments of people who like how they look,
mm,
as opposed to what the practice actually is supposed to feel like.
mm.
And that's a dangerous thing, because when many people tell you that you're really good, um, either you yourself, as many people have got beautiful awareness, now deciding to not listen to themselves, that's something else, but I've got the awareness that whilst people are liking what they're doing, they can
Mm,
tell that actually it's not really that refined. People
no.
who are complimenting you don't really know what they're talking about. But at the same time, you come to someone like myself and I'm like, this is cool, but it's not a sequence. It's
Mm,
just a series of things that you manage to make look good because of your mobility, because of your background as a gymnast, because of
yeah.
your dancer, all those things. And if you really, really want to become good at embodying musicality and at creating an environment where physiologically and neurologically the practice really brings about growth and positivity and an understanding, a self-awareness for your students, there's going to be a lot of work to be done. And so I found myself discussing social media as both something very useful, but also something that comes against
Mm.
people's growth as teachers, because they don't really know right from left. And oftentimes they get attached way too much to both positive and negative feedback. Yeah.
And it's also about knowing themselves, right?
Yeah.
And that takes
Time.
courage, I
Hmm.
think, and time,
Hmm.
obviously, but courage to look at it on two levels. One is, the participants, like you said about that woman. I've had over the years, participants, and they come and then, things move and they're not ready to unpack stuff,
Hmm.
and I just need to, for me, I just need to respect that it's okay and that they don't come back,
Hmm.
again. Um, but for the teacher also, it's about unpacking their stuff so that they can, like you said, stand your own ground and say, but this is me and this is what I believe in and this is what I want to share.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of
Yeah.
courage. In a world of social media, it takes a lot of
I
courage.
can I can only imagine. Yes. Yeah. 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 Totally. The courage and the bravery. I like to think of it as naivety as well, because there's something I find delightful in thinking about things like a bit more like a child would, and that it is innocent in the sense that what you're trying to create and share just comes from a deep-seated want to question,
Mm,
not to answer, to question. And so I think I've kept, and I still do my best nowadays, to keep that this childlike questioning aspect,
mm,
um, if you know what I mean, as opposed to being so sure of fine answers.
mm.
Yeah. So
Curiosity. Mm,
curiosity, I think, is where I'm leading towards, because while courage is one, I would say, to be more pragmatic about it, I think is the capacity to be disliked, which is not necessarily
mm,
courage, but it's deeper. And so developing that as a teacher, I mean, check out books like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, for instance.
mm,
You have quite a few um, ideas in there as to how to
mm,
build resilience. Certain things you control, others you don't. Um, don't make yourself responsible for things you're not. Don't take on much more than what your task or your job title gives you. I mentioned early on, yoga teachers, I don't really know how it is now because I don't hang out in a lot of studios, but there was a period of time where yoga teachers, more than a decade ago, used to think of themselves as physiotherapists, as psychotherapists, as chiropractors, as counselors, as
mm.
you name it, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And simply because the practice, encompasses so
Mm,
many things. But if you don't allow yourself that and you just stay first and foremost with what it is, and then share where you would like your journey to go, that's going to be fueled by your own interest, meaning what's going on with you right now. Both being pretentious and humble at the same time, I think you can do very well.
mm,
Um, but I appreciate that if you've done a 3 weeks, 200-hour training, you are not in a space, in a place where you can give people advice as to what supplements they should be taking, what they should do for their back pain, how to fix this and that, how their relationships with their non-vegan or non-vegetarian partner should be going, so on and so forth. And so that's something I've done also, which is not to get involved in that type of stuff. Which
mm,
I say that because I've seen friends and colleagues delving into this in
mm,
ways that I don't think was constructive. Yeah.
mm,
So building yourself, I mean, growing yourself as a person is one, but I
mm.
just mentioned whatever interest is going on with you. You mentioned Sally Parks early on. Does she do natal pregnancy?
Pregnancy. She does a lot of
There
pregnancy,
you go.
women's
Yeah, we met.
stuff. Yeah.
We met at. I'm thinking of her because I think one of my students has done recently a pregnancy course.
Okay.
So, for instance, you get pregnant or your partner gets pregnant, um, and all of a sudden you are interested in pregnancy.
Mm,
This is a valid way to delve into something. It's
mm,
not going to make you an obstetrician, a gynecologist. It's not going to turn you into a doctor. It's not going to turn you into a specialist. But your this area of interest, it's going to spark a passion. It's going to spark a depth of interest that will make you a better teacher if and when you decide to follow it, and if and when you decide to share your quest for better questions about it.
mm.
Mm.
Amazing. Yeah. You mentioned earlier on about the journey forwards.
Yeah.
Where's your journey heading?
That is a good question. I talk about conversations. This morning, I had a conversation with a psychologist from the US who has been coming to my class for. I teach one class here in Barcelona, who's been coming, and I've seen her account on Instagram, so I thought I'll just mention that to her and say that she seemed to be doing some very interesting work. So we had a conversation about life trainings and everything, and then we ended up talking about me and where do I go next. Um, so I've got quite a few plans.
Mm,
Um, I am in the middle of training as a psychotherapist because talking therapy is something that interests me now a
Mm-hmm.
lot more. But also, I mentor and I coach people. I am writing a book of affirmation and motivation speeches that people will be able to listen to and read for themselves. I started doing that for teachers actually, and I'm now stretching it out to anyone who wants to listen to
Mm-hmm.
my voice and to my words. And at the same time, I am also taking the time to not necessarily reinvent myself, but I'm giving myself the time to try to do things differently. And what I mean by that is that I'm doing a lot less
Mm.
projects than I used to. Now, you're asking me this. We are today's Wednesday, right?
Yes.
On Friday, I'm turning 45. So you're asking me this just at a time where it's not just the beginning of the year, it is also um, it's not a big 50s, but it's the 45. It is the time also where I've been living in a different country. I
Mm.
moved to Spain 6 months ago. I got divorced last year. I don't live with my children anymore. So I've got times, time to think about me, myself, and I, so to speak. And pardon me, I'm still answering that question as to what's next. If you mean professionally, yeah, that I am interested. I am um, I'm smiling about it because I am excited about what's coming next and what I'm building.
Oh.
Both teacher training course, one starting in 2 weeks in Paris in French, another one starting space and flow teacher training course starting in Barcelona the first weekend of March, and that will be in English. Um, so those two things are going on, which I'm very, very happy about. And by the way, for people interested, there are a few
Mm.
spaces left. So be in touch if you're looking for a transition-based
When is
movement
it?
practice. Um,
In March?
in
About the
March,
one in English?
the first weekend, it's one weekend a month. It's the first weekend of every month for 10 months, as well as a retreat in Mallorca the last week of June. So space-flow.yoga. You have all
Mm.
the details there.
Yes.
But otherwise, as I mentioned, I am just writing a blog, which I'm hoping to be able to turn into a book fairly soon. Um, and that will be also up ideally by Friday. I've given my birthday as the deadline for myself to publish it. And on there, you are going to get hypnotherapy tracks, motivation tracks,
Yeah.
and words to read. And also, you'll be able to look at the various masterminds that I'm going to be offering. So, masterminds are basically group coaching that are geared towards either specific groups of people, say teachers. I'm going to do one teachers and one non-teachers, and it's only for a small group, 6 7 8
Mm.
people maximum, that somehow have got a goal or major goal in life that they'd like to work on alongside others working on theirs, with the guidance, with the help and the lead coming from me on this one. So we'll be doing that online. So anywhere you live, you'll be able to work with me on a weekly basis, small group, really geared towards giving people a bit of not only motivation, but also
Mm.
accountability, not only guidance, but also space to explore ideas and space to brainstorm and have conversations and build relationships with other people who are in similar places, similar spaces, but also perhaps more advanced or less advanced, depending on what they're working on in particular, so that eventually we can all help each other out, not just mentally and psychologically, um, but also with the actual work itself. As you know, from time to time, being able to say to yourself, look, next Thursday, so and so and so and so are waiting for me to tell them how my week went, means that my
Mm.
week this week is going to be different. That if no one was expecting me to do something, to do anything, because
Mm.
you can always report it and you can always just tell yourself you'll do it next
Mm.
month. And so what I'm going to be offering is all of that, is a mix of, as I said, guidance, accountability, um, mentoring, as well as a space to voice and question their own interest and how to best go about building not only their own personal brands and so on, but also their own careers and um, and the integration into their personal lives. Yeah. So that's why I'm smiling and I'm excited because I've been wanting to take a few months for myself here in Barcelona just to get settled, and I feel ready
Amazing.
to just help, you know, in that capacity.
Sounds amazing. It just made me think, like your creation is space and flow.
Hmm.
It's like the mastermind's almost like you're holding space and giving them space
Hmm.
in order to then flow in life. It's just that whole thing came to mind. I was just listening to you and going, space so they can flow.
There you go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
So, if you can sum up group classes, the
mhm.
whole love of group classes in one word, what would that be?
Journey.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing that I love, and I've experienced it this morning, and I'm even made a joke because I normally videotape all of my classes. I just put a camera in a corner, just
Yes.
press record, and the whole thing just gets recorded. It gives me some content and for social media, and also just for myself to check out what worked, what didn't, what verbal cue works, what doesn't, so on and so forth. And today I didn't bother. And as usual, the class was, as far as I could tell, a good one. Now, I rarely speak of my classes as good one, but today, and I'll share what I mean by that. I have only one parameter for me to call a class a good one. And I've always had that, even though I didn't have the vocabulary for it, but I've realized it over the years. And this morning I thought about it. I don't really know whether everyone in the class loved it, but the class that I taught this morning was a class I would have liked to be taught. That's it. I.e., when
Mm,
it sounds pretentious, perhaps, I don't care. But it's a case of I am watching, sensing, seeing, feeling my students having an experience, going through a journey with and by themselves, alongside others who are doing exactly the same thing. And they seem to be doing something very interesting, challenging, but at the same time, um, comforting, inspiring. And I looked at them and I thought, I wish I was one of you.
mm,
And that to me is a good class. And that's the reason why I wished I'd recorded it so that I told them, I said, I wished my camera was on so that I could go home and actually practice what I just talked to. And so journey because group fitness or group teaching and group experiences is about 5, 20, 40, 50 nervous systems connecting to each other, with each other. And if the leader, the teacher is decent, the journey will be physiologically a gift to everyone, even if physically some people can't do everything, are not happy with this, even if it triggers certain things. If the nervous systems somehow tapped and helped each other out, and people start to breathe in a way that is communal, if that makes sense, in a way that is collective,
mm,
while still respecting their own individual peculiarities, you know, that is to me a journey that only group classes can give you.
mm,
And that is the reason why, as much as I only teach weekends, I teach workshops. Mainly 95% of my students are teachers, but I still wanted to keep one or two public classes where I get to not only be part of that, but I also get to witness it. And I get to lead a group of nervous systems through a little journey. It's a 75-minute journey. And you've seen this in people coming out of spin classes or
mm,
dance classes, and sometimes obviously yoga classes, to where people meet there and then they leave and they go and sit down for a coffee and they're like, you know what? when you sat next to me, I was like, oh, this woman is very, very close to me. And halfway through the halfway through the practice, I only had love for you. And I didn't mind you sweating on top of me, so on and so forth. Oh, by the way, my name is Julia.
Mm,
Fancy grabbing coffee. That is something. Yes, the
mm,
practice itself, the physiology, the endorphin releasing, the release and all of that is for something. The teacher is not necessarily responsible for this, the practices. But I love when there is a cohesion
mm,
of love, a cohesion of human beings and of thoughts and of connections that take place in that context.
mm,
So the social aspect, I think, is magnificent
mm,
in the group fitness setting.
mm.
Mm.
Beautiful. A bunch of nervous systems. Oh, I love it. I love it.
says the wannabe poet. Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time
No, thanks to
in
you.
being here. And how can our listeners reach out or connect with you or follow you?
hmm So I am going to plug, I don't know when this will be coming out, but on the 20th of January, I am going to be turning 45 and my personal website will be up. And that website is simply Raphan,
Mm.
raphan.co.uk.
Oh, amazing.
And on there, you are going to have my blog, my podcast, because I do have a podcast called Talking Flow,
Mm-hmm.
where I talk about creativity, sensuality, and resilience. So all the transcripts and the details are on that website also. And on that website, you will be able to find the details for the masterminds that are going to be starting next month, as well as coaching sessions in case you'd like to work one-to-one with me. So that's one place. Otherwise, um, space-flow.yoga, where everything in relation to workshops and teacher training courses are being shown and shared. And lastly, social media. Instagram is where I am most active. And I'm now discovering an app called Vero, which I plan on doing a lot more on because I like the interface.
What is
Yeah,
it? Vero.
Vero, Vero. Yeah.
Oh, I
Mhm.
think I've heard of it actually. I think I've not looked at it. So I'll have a look. So thank
Yeah.
you so much, everyone, and for listening in. And thank you, Raphan, for your time.
My pleasure, Hansi. Thanks again,
Mm.
everyone. Take care.